Durbania, I'm Durbin, and with Birth of a Nation on the way, I decided to go back and read way too much into one of my favorites, The Patriot, with Mel Gibson. Fantastic cast. Really enjoyed watching this movie again. I haven't seen it in years, but, you know, growing up, it was always one of my favorite movies. It remains one of my favorite Mel Gibson war movies, and Mel Gibson remains one of my favorite actors and directors. I just think he has a great eye for directing, and whenever he's on the screen acting, he just gets so into it, and there's something about his facial expressions and his eyes where it's just like it lets you in, and you just feel whatever he's feeling, which, you know, in movies like The Patriot, you know, his war movies where it's all emotional and sad, and he's really angry, yeah, you feel that pretty good. So it's been a while since I've seen The Patriot, so it was really fun to go back and watch it again for this reading way too much into. And as I was watching this movie, something that I really saw in this movie that stood out to me to read way too much into. So this movie's really just, it's about the birth of America. It's, you know, when we're just the colonies, we're fighting for our freedom from Britain, we're fighting for the colonies to be one nation and all that. And so, like, it's a really powerful story right there. So the heart of the story is, it's the fight for freedom. That freedom is this precious thing. It's this thing that we want and this thing that we crave. But the picture I see is that there's an enemy out there that wants to oppress. Now, in this movie, it is the British, it's the Redcoats, and they want to bring the colonies under the crown of King George. And they're like, hey, we don't want that. We want to be our own nation, a sovereign nation. We want to be a free people. And what's interesting is, in order to oppress on the outside, and this is the picture I got in this movie, the enemy must first go in and oppress on the inside. So in order to, like, take all this whole thing on the outside, they have to, like, kill their spirits on the inside and get them imprisoned even in their hearts. To me, one of the interesting things about Mel Gibson's character in this movie is he's already not free in his heart and his soul. Like, when we open this movie, the first line that we hear is, "I have long feared that my sins would return to visit me, and the cost is more than I could bear." And we find out through the course of this movie that he has quite a past, and he's become a war hero because, you know, back in the days, basically they came upon this fort, men, women, and children were killed. They came upon the group, the army that had done it, and not only did they kill and slaughter that army, but they killed them so slowly. They cut them into pieces, they tortured them, and Mel Gibson talks about how he just remembers their screams, and, you know, his rage and his passion at the time made it seem like a great idea, but after doing such a gory, graphic massacre that he did, their screams, the blood, all of that stuff has stayed with him, and the guilt has stayed with him. And in fact, since it stayed with him, it's kept him a prisoner. Like, in his heart, he's not free. And not only is he hanging on to the guilt of that stuff, but he's also hanging on to fear. He has this fear of the monster that lives inside of him, the monster that is capable of such awful and horrible killing. I mean, you could tell that's not the person he wants to be. He's got a family now, you know, when the movie opens, his wife had died, he's got kids and all that, and so he doesn't want to be that person, and he's made great strides to change, but he lives in fear of his sins coming back to visit him. He lives in fear of the monster inside coming out, which is why in Charleston, when they're voting on whether or not to join this war and stuff, you know, he's not going to cast his vote to join the war. Not because he's afraid of fighting, not because he's afraid of war, not because he's afraid of dying, but because he's afraid of himself. He's afraid of that monster that lives inside. So now, look at this from his perspective. Heath Ledger plays Gabriel, his oldest son. And his oldest son, without his permission, he's 18, but, you know, still without his permission and getting any kind of consulting from him, signs up to join the army. Now, that kind of fiery spirit and that kind of drive to go and do that, can you just picture Mel Gibson from his point of view saying, in this way his sins are coming back to visit him? Because the monster that lives in him now may be passed down to his oldest son? Then his second oldest son, Thomas, like, so desperately wants to join the army. He's only 15, but he so desperately wants to join, and he so desperately wants to fight. He sneaks into his dad's bedroom, goes into his dad's, like, giant chest that holds all the stuff from his past, like, you know, his tomahawk and old uniform and all that stuff. So the son puts on the uniform, picks up the tomahawk and the weapons, and admires himself in the mirror. What do you think is going through Mel Gibson's mind when he walks in and sees his son, you know, like, oh, wow, look how cool I look. I mean, can you imagine the fear that is rising up in him? Like, oh my gosh, the monster that lives inside my heart, I have truly somehow managed to pass down to these kids. I mean, can you imagine that fear right there? The truth is, though, Heath Ledger was not seeing that monster. He was not, that's not what he was dealing with. he had his eyes on something far bigger, which was a free nation and true freedom. And that's where his eyes were. He saw the big picture. He saw the cause and what it was about. And that is what was actually going on in Heath Ledger's heart. And that was what was actually driving his character throughout the movie. Now, Thomas gets killed by this guy, Tavington, who is, I'm telling you, a freaking monster. And so Tavington goes and gets a hold of Mel Gibson's family because, you know, Heath Ledger's there after being wounded and there was a battle in his backyard and all that stuff. So he orders the house to be burned down and kills Thomas, Mel Gibson's second oldest son. And so this is where just the rage wells up. So he has to go rescue Heath Ledger, who is now being led to the noose to be hung for his crimes against the crown. And so he has got to go save his son. So he gets his other two kids. He goes hand-to-hand combat against dudes with muskets with a tomahawk. But then the monster comes out and he just totally savagely with that axe takes this guy down. Bloody mess all over the place. It is... But it's like in that moment, he realizes he has to fight. He's not fighting for the freedom of a nation. He's fighting for the freedom of his family because Heath Ledger's not going to leave the army. His family's in danger because of this crazy dude, Tavington. So he's like, okay, I have to fight. And so he puts the monster in check, showing you that he is fully capable of doing that. And once again, he truly has nothing to really fear, but he still fears that monster. He still fears those sins in him. So then as this movie progresses, Tavington just continues to get more and more evil, and Mel Gibson comes face to face with him with that epic line, "Before this war is over, I'm going to kill you." But Tavington begins to figure out who Mel Gibson is, begins to figure out who his men are, and starts to find their pressure points and to go find their families. Because again, if the enemy is going to want to oppress the outside, he's got to kill that spirit to fight on the inside. The enemy has to get on the inside and disillusion. He's got to get on the inside and kill the fight. So that's what he starts to do. And Heath Ledger in this movie, he gets married, and his wife is like pregnant, and then Heath Ledger's wife and her parents go back to their hometown where the British are waiting. They file them into the church and they burn the church down with the entire village inside the church. So yeah, Tavington is a monster. But what did he do there? He reached inside Heath Ledger's heart and he tore it out. He took away Heath Ledger's vision because Heath Ledger had had his eyes lifted up on the goal, which was the cause, which was the freedom of a nation. And Heath Ledger took his eyes off that and he put his eyes on vengeance, and it cost him his life when he went up against Tavington. And when Heath Ledger was killed by Tavington, what happened? Mel Gibson is already dealing with a prison in his heart, gets bashed hard on the inside by this enemy, by this sheer evil guy. And when he gets hit hard on the inside, it breaks his spirit. It breaks his will to fight. He has this one line where one of the generals is talking to him and says, "We really need you for this next battle. And you need to justify the deaths of your sons and their sacrifices and fight for what they believed in." And Mel Gibson's just so broken, is like, what is it that men think they can justify death? Is it arrogance? Until after he buries his son Gabriel, and then he finds the American flag that Gabriel found on the ground, tattered and torn, and was sewing back together. And that's when Mel Gibson finally catches the vision. This is what his son believed in, a free nation. And so he lifts his eyes up to freedom, to the actual cause. And it gives him the strength to ride into battle and to lead his men again and even come up with an awesome plan. So they go into this final epic battle and put this plan into motion. And Mel Gibson sees his enemy. He sees Tavington, and his eyes temporarily go off the cause and they go back to vengeance. Thankfully, one of the soldiers yells, "The light is faltering!" And Mel Gibson takes his eyes off that guy and he looks and he sees the American flag running in retreat the wrong way. So what does he do? He runs up there, he grabs the flag, and he's like, this is not going to do. He forgets his vengeance. In this moment, he drops his vengeance, he takes his eyes off it, and he puts his eyes where it mattered, on the goal, the cause, on freedom. And when he put his eyes on that, he ran forward with that flag. It encouraged all of his troops, and they ran with him, and they were able to hold the line because he, in the face of retreat, grabbed that flag and said, "They are not taking this ground today. That is not going to happen." And he holds that line, and he holds that ground, and he brings them victory. Here's the amazing thing. When his eyes went to the right place and his heart went to the right place, justice came to Tavington. Granted, in this movie, it's vengeance. He finally gets to kill Tavington, so that's kind of all of our moments of satisfaction. Now, when I look at real life, vengeance is not good. It is not the way to go. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. That is not for us to be dealing with. But the idea that justice came at the right time when he took his eyes off of vengeance and put them on the right thing, that's the idea that is standing out to me. And so when I look at that and I look at the pictures of this movie of how important freedom is, I look at my own life and I realize how easy it is for me to imprison myself in things. It's like when I take my eyes and I put them on anxiety and worry, those things consume me. When I'm really mad at somebody and I put my eyes on that anger consumes me and I'm not free on the inside. And I do believe in the devil. I do believe there's an enemy of our souls out there who wants to oppress us. And if he wants to do it from the outside, he's got to do it from the inside. He's got to take that fight out of us. He's got to break us on the inside. And when I focus on those wrong things, it's those wrong things that consume me. But I find in my life, when I focus on Jesus and I lift my eyes up to him, I mean, he who the Son sets free is free indeed. So when I lift my eyes up to Jesus, I find the freedom that I'm really looking for. And when I put that in the right place and I put him first in my life, it's that freedom now that begins to consume me. Now, it doesn't make life like a bed of roses. No, life is always full of its own stupid little challenges. And just like when justice came to Tavington at the right time, when Gibson took his focus off vengeance and on the right thing, when I take my focus and put it on the right thing, I find those other things fall in line. Again, I love this movie. That's one of the pictures that I saw in reading way too much into this movie. Did you see The Patriot? What sorts of things do you read into that movie? Make sure to let me know in the comments. While you're there, hit that subscribe button. Would love to have you be a subscriber to Durbania and be on top of all the new videos and things coming out here. Always trying to do new things and entertaining things, fun things. So hit that subscribe button. Be a part of that. I'm Durbin. Thank you so much for checking out Durbania.